1 December.
I think there are a number of the pages that have the wrong month on them, and I suspect that that's what you're dealing with. I think 28th October is actually 28th November, so move backwards.
What's the writing on it?
On the 24th, it's the last page that has the 24th as the date on it, and at the top it's Dick Kopp. Do you have that in front of you?
I have a 24 November 1654 Dick Kopp.
Okay, and down in the middle of the page there's an entry 1852. You see that?
I do.
I take it that's 6:52 p.m.
Right.
And in your handwriting it says called to from Claridge.
Yes.
Dash. I take it this is a conversation with Claridge.
Apparently so, yes. And it must have been on the telephone.
And it says then, no manifesto provided.
I think that's probably manifests.
Excuse me, manifests. George says that they have hope of talking way out. First of all, do you know what that refers to?
If I could remember who George was, that would help. And I'm not trying to be flippant about that. I don't remember. There's a telephone number written below it for George. That's apparently a U.S. number.
Well, I think
my sense is that that's talking about.
I think we won't mention his last name, but I think he's a CIA official, and I'm going to ask you whether the conversation doesn't have to do with the plane.
Well, I would certainly sense that it has to do with the aircraft, and I would guess that the no manifests provided is a call from a person. In fact, if the George is in the air branch, that would indicate to me that he had called and said, you know, this thing is still very screwed up. There's no manifests. Now what are you going to do? And
so this is information that's coming from Mr. Claridge to you.
Well, either that or I called. It says, if you note my note up above, 1852, called to and then from Dewey Claridge. There may have been a series of phone calls back and forth, and I don't know which is which.
Well, regardless of who's calling whom, the information is flowing from the CIA to you.
Apparently so, yes.
And they're saying that they have hope of talking their way out. I take it these are the people who are flying the plane carrying the Hawks.
My guess is that's correct, yes.
And they've got to talk their way out.
Talk their way out of wherever they're stuck, if that's what's happened.
They're stuck at a landing point between Israel and Iran, I take it.
I don't recall the event, but I'm undoubtedly everything else having gone wrong with this, that went wrong too, yes.
Well, my question is, when you have this conversation with Mr. Claridge about no manifests and the people flying the plane are going to have to talk their way out of it, did Mr. Claridge know at that time what they were talking their way out of?
They're talking, as my guess is, what that refers to is that they're going to talk their way out of the airfield. They're going to, you know, we don't have a manifest, I'm sorry, we're carrying whatever it was they were saying at the time, and we'll be leaving now, kind of talk their way out of it.
My question is, at that point in time, was Mr. Claridge yet aware of the nature of the cargo?
By the 24th, I do not know.
Turn the page, if you would. It says 25 November at the top. 7:20 a.m. call from Dewey. Do you have that in front of you?
I do.
This is a call from Claridge, I take it.
Right.
And you're taking notes of what he's saying to you.
Yes.
And are there, just answer this question, yes or no, please. Are there words circled?
There are.
Okay, don't mention the words that are circled.
Understood.
It says aircraft, does
Right.
it not?
Blank have told us to use blank blank.
And then it says cargo must be listed as machine parts, spares for oil industry.
Right.
Now that's Mr. Claridge telling you.
Again, I told you that I had originally dissembled with the agency. In my initial contacts with the Israelis, we agreed that we would call these machine parts for the oil fields or whatever. But we specifically talked about when, in my discussions with the Israelis, way back on the 17th or 18th, that was the agreement we had come to. So I had told people at the CIA that.
Well, I understand.
You're asking me if I have by now told Mr. Claridge the truth about what's on that cargo, and I cannot tell you, counsel, when it was that I apprised him of it.
Or that he found out from some other source. My question is, why would, if Mr. Claridge is telling you that the cargo must be listed as machine parts, spares for oil industry, does that indicate that he was then aware of what the real cargo was?
Not necessarily to me, because what that may indicate is that he has made arrangements with the people in the circles through his station chiefs for a clearance with a manifest that reads a certain way. And what he's telling me is to go back through COP, General Secord, and make darn sure that the proprietary is instructed accordingly. I'm not sure what point. I'm trying to answer your questions in a very straightforward manner. I don't know what question we're trying to answer here.
You've answered it. I think you've said that you do not know from looking at this note one way or the other whether Mr. Claridge was yet aware.
That's correct. But I do want you to know that there came a point in time when I confirmed to him with integrity and honesty, yes, that's what's aboard there.
Take a recess.
I have about 5 more minutes on this topic, Mr. Chairman, and
Please
I will
proceed.
abide by the committee's wishes.
Please proceed.
Again, on the subject of who was aware of this shipment at the time it occurred, was the President aware of the shipment at the time it occurred?
I do not know. I was told that the President had approved it. I have a contemporaneous note to that effect.
In one of your notebooks?
Yes, sir.
And was Mr. Casey aware of it at the time it occurred?
I believe he was. If he was not aware of it at that instant, it was only because he was on a trip, and I don't recall whether he had returned by this point or not, but shortly thereafter he was fully aware because he and I met several times on the issue, and it was he who sent forward the original finding which Mr. Sporkin prepared.
So you met with him on this topic, i.e. the shipment of the 18 Hawks, shortly after the shipment occurred?
I believe it was afterwards, yes, sir.
But it might have been before.
It may have been. I'd have to check to see when Mr. Casey returned from his trip. I know that he was gone. He was not in the country, or at least not available, when this whole thing began on or about the 17th or 18th.
You mentioned earlier the Attorney General. Was the Attorney General aware at the time that Hawks were being shipped?
I was told, or at least I understood, I don't know if I was told, but I understood that he was, because it was through that effort that we ended up getting on the right track for the finding. And that was, I think we went searching for some kind of previous Attorney General's determination or legal opinion on the use of a finding for these purposes. And it was my understanding, I think then and it is now, that these circumstances were explained to him. I thought that he had seen and approved the November finding, and he had provided an explanation for why this was a legitimate way to go about doing it. All of this at approximately the 25th or 26th. And all findings are reviewed by the Attorney General. And that finding, which eventually got signed by the President, I thought had been seen by the Attorney General, and I thought it was the Attorney General who had provided the earlier French-Smith determination on the legitimacy of this process. I also believe that it was the Attorney General who had something to the effect said, look, if the President made a mental finding back in July or June or whatever it was, that can simply be ratified by this later finding. And that's why those words were put into the finding that Mr. Sporkin and I worked on. But I did not talk to the Attorney General directly about it, nor did I talk to the President directly about it.
Okay, I want to be clear about that. You did not have a conversation with the Attorney General on this subject at or about the time it occurred?
I don't recall one, no.
What is the basis for your belief that he approved the finding in November?
Well, all other findings were brought to the Attorney General for his certification, I guess, for the legitimacy of it. I personally carried the January findings to him, and I believe that this finding went through that same kind of a process, but I can't confirm it.
Do you believe that because someone told you it happened or because it's normal procedure?
I believe it's both, but I can't recall the specific conversation. What I'm building for you is a description of various things that happened along the way that we ended up with a finding to begin with. That the way I had been going about trying to fix the problem was not going to work, and that we ended up going with a finding to fix the problem. And even then, we ended up having to go back and change it.
Just so that the record is clear on this, it was your understanding that as a matter of procedure, the Attorney General signed off on all findings, and you have a general recollection of hearing that he did it in this case, but not a specific one. Is that?
I do not have a specific one in this case, no.
Do you have a general recollection of being told that the Attorney General had signed off on this finding?
Yes, I have a general recollection because it was in that time frame that I was apprised of Attorney General French-Smith's earlier determination that this was the way to go about doing it.
Now, when you say this, isn't it true that Attorney General French-Smith's prior opinion related to using an intelligence finding as a way of transferring?
Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
And so what your recollection is that that William French-Smith opinion was discussed and known to you at or about the time of the November finding?
Yes.
Final question before we break. Do you know why the missiles were originally supposed to be flown to Tabriz and were, in fact, flown to Tehran?
No.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The hearing will stand in recess for 10 minutes.
Senator Inouye calling a 10-minute recess, as you can hear, so that senators can go and check business in their offices. They may even have to vote on some other issue of the day, which may require their attention on Capitol Hill, or they may just want a break for 10 minutes after listening to an hour and a half of fairly complicated testimony from Lieutenant Colonel Oliver